Welcome to Uprising, David, Joan, Bilal, and Dalesy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to start by asking all four of you to share with our listeners the role that you have played in the Occupy movement so they can get a context of where you're coming from during our discussion today. David DeGraw, I'd like to start with you. What role have you played in Occupy?
Well, I was one of the original organizers. We helped start the 99% movement over a year before Occupy started. We had our first attempt at occupying Zuccotti Park back in June. Then we kind of hooked up with the Bloombergville crew that was occupying down the road at City Hall at the same time. And then, we came back again in September after, the Adbusters call, of course. And then since then, I've been trying to organize throughout the country, find people who are doing the most constructive work and trying to hook them up and just building, on a national level now, growing the movement, forming alliances. We just formed an alliance with the Occupy the Dream coalition of African-American church people, and working with Dr. Ben Chavis and people like Russell Simmons. And, so we're trying to broaden the movement and grow it out right now, and that's what I've been focused on.
Mm-hmm. And Joan Donovan, you're based here in Los Angeles. What role have you been playing?
I got involved with Occupy LA the first day of the occupation came down, merely sort of as a participant, but kind of as a spectator in a way. I kind of wanted to see what was going to happen. But you could tell that first day that something enormous was about to take place on the grounds of City Hall. I mean, I had been meeting people all day long that were very excited to stay overnight, and I kept thinking to myself, are these people really going to sleep in a park? And then I thought, wait, I'm going to sleep in a park. There was this kind of transformation where you start to realize that not only are you interacting with people, but you're also changing yourself. And so after the first few days, things had been rolling along pretty well in LA. But what I started to notice was that occupations around Southern California had started to spring up, and that I wanted to get in touch with them. Some of them had come to Occupy LA, and we traded emails and things. And so over the first few weeks, I started the Occupation Communication Committee, which we just wanted to keep in contact with everyone in SoCal so that we could coordinate action, so that we could work better together towards our own ends. And so in starting that committee, I had quite a bit of contacts that I had made going out to different occupations in SoCal. And then there was a call from New York City for anyone involved in Occupy to get on the phone. And they had a technology set up where they could have 100 different occupiers on the phone. So we called into that conference call from the camp. And one of the things that they said on the call was, if you're interested in more inter-occupation communication, join our facilitation team and we'll do some more of these calls. So 2 weeks later, we were doing a call from the ground in Occupy LA at the camp, which David serendipitously ended up being at the camp the day before, and I invited him to do the introduction to the call. And so we had talked about that, and we had about 130 participants on that call that night.
From around the country?
From around the country, Yeah. I mean, you pick up the phone and it's, hey, I'm from Occupy Alabama, and I'm from Occupy, Kalamazoo, and I'm, so you're really connecting with people that are doing the same thing all around the country, and it just enlarges the scope of the movement.
So you were really intimately and have been intimately involved in communication between the various Occupy movements.
Yeah.
Dalesy, you're here in Los Angeles, as well as my final guest, Bilal Ali. The two of you are involved in both Occupy Los Angeles as well as Occupy the Hood. What role do you see yourself as having played so far in this movement?
Hi. Well, basically, my involvement with Occupy the Hood has started because, when I first arrived at Occupy LA, I honestly thought I was just going to stay there for a few days. And the experiences that I had with, horizontal participatory democracy really forced me to become more open-minded, to change, the way that, I see things, and to realize that other people had valid experiences and ideologies, and we had to come to consensus. And that didn't necessarily mean voting for the best option. It meant all of us dialoguing and coming to, a direct understanding. And I want other people in the community to have that experience too. I want them to be radicalized by that. And that's why I decided to join Occupy the Hood. Moving forward, I'm also trying to do Latino outreach in LA. And we want more people to experience, what we were able to experience at Occupy LA.
Bilal?
Yes.
And you're a long-time activist. You've been a fixture in Los Angeles for a while.
Right. No, I'm an organizer, not an activist.
Okay.
That's a difference.
Well, explain that.
Organizer and activist, you got an hour? No.
In a nutshell.
Organizers build movement. An activist, I'm an activist organizer, I guess. An activist build protests and marches. Okay. My involvement with Occupy LA began the second day of planning meetings. We were having general assemblies at Pershing Square in downtown LA, setting up for the October 1st occupation. And we moved in. I occupied the City Hall Westwood side, as I would call it, on my north side, for about 62 days, up until the night of the raid, in which I was arrested and beat up. And from Occupy L.A., my comrade Kwanzaa and crew and a few other people, we said in order for this movement to be sustainable, it would have to move beyond City Hall, because we were saying Occupy L.A., not Occupy City Hall. And that was kind of like a containment kind of thing going on there, too. That's why I think they were so comfortable with us being there for a while. The hood, the oppressed communities in Los Angeles, people of color live, was not being represented at Occupy LA as we felt it should be. We want people to be involved in this movement, in the process. So we had to go into the hood, and we started occupying the hood. We had general assemblies in various areas, Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, East LA, South Central, Inglewood, so forth, talking to different people. We had a rolling Occupy the Hood action assembly going on, talking to people about this idea. As a result of that, we have Occupy Crenshaw. They're doing that down there from Adams Boulevard to Imperial. We've been able to do joint actions, and we wanted to start Occupy the Hood also be a vehicle that we wanted to go into the oppressed communities and target and occupy those institutions responsible for that oppression in those communities, and use it as a vehicle to organize the community around the occupation movement.
Well, let me throw out a question now to the four of you about what you think have been the greatest achievements of this movement outside of simply raising the public consciousness of the United States. Certainly among its biggest victories are the idea that 99% of Americans are suffering at the expense of 1%, and that idea seems to have been such a galvanizing force. But aside from that public consciousness, what do you see as the biggest achievements thus far of this extremely young movement, barely a few months old, and yet Time magazine may not have named the protester as a person of the year had it not been for the Occupy movement, notwithstanding the Arab Spring, etc. Mm-hmm. David?
Well, I think what you're saying from a PR perspective, raising consciousness, I think that has been our most important achievement so far, because I hate to kind of word it like this, but I see this as such a successful PR operation, to show Americans that everyone is really suffering, or 99% are facing financial hardships, and that people are taking action. They're not going to just sit back and be passive, because going into this whole thing, when we first tried to occupy Liberty Park in June, we didn't get enough people to turn out, and it was really very depressing and pretty much humiliating. Everyone was kind of laughing oh, there'll never be a nonviolent civil disobedience movement in the United States now. Everyone's too propagandized. Everyone's too passive. So just the fact that Occupy Wall Street, or everything is taking off so much, that it's really showing that we're not going to be passive, and we're not going to take it anymore. Enough is enough. But going forward, we need to stay decentralized, I hope, but be better organized and better coordinated nationally.
Joan?
I think the most successful part of the movement has been the ability to organize so many agendas into one unified message, right? You don't have anyone out in front of the movement which, promoting a single issue, right? Which is what party politics does, is they promote single issues for a very short amount of time and are very ineffective at reaching the goal of their agenda. There's a lot of compromise. Here, you have a movement that is completely disorganized and leverages broadcast technology to organize a message rather than the people. And so anyone can participate in adding to that message.
On that, I want to bring up, and before I get Dalesy and Bilal's comments on this, Naomi Klein wrote an interesting piece. She had a conversation with Yotam Marom recently, who is an organizer, and she discusses how her worry, quote, is that there are so many groups trying to co-opt this movement and trying to raise money off of its efforts that the movement risks defining itself by what it is not rather than by what it is, or more importantly, might become. If the movement is constantly put in a position of saying, no, we're not your pawn, we're not this, we're not that, the danger is getting boxed into a defensive identity that was really imposed from the outside. And she says, I think some of that happened in the movement opposing corporate globalization post-Seattle, and I'd hate to see those mistakes repeated. And I'm wondering, I don't know, Bilal, you've been doing this for a long time, and Dalesy, I don't know if you were active during the anti-globalization movements, particularly around Seattle, and probably Joan and David, you might have been, but what do you think of this statement that Naomi Klein is making? And Dalesy, you were saying earlier about being so impressed by the horizontalism of it and the fact that everybody can participate. But when everybody has a voice, how does one express what one stands for?
Well, definitely Occupy LA, and I'm aware that other occupations have put out statements of political independence. And it's very hard for any Occupy movement to come together and necessarily shame a particular group that's trying to co-opt them or to take any real actions, As Occupy LA, you have the right to take autonomous action. And so an individual might carry out an action or, an event in the name of Occupy LA, but they don't have the consensus of the entire movement. And that's just a consequence of, approaching our movement in a horizontal, way. And, it might create some problems, but what we have to gain from it, I wouldn't want to change that for anything.
Bilal?
Yeah, I see the Occupy movement is constantly transforming all the time. People who join the occupation who are at City Hall, I would ask them, if you're the same person coming out of this as you were coming into this, you haven't learned anything. And I think the greatest achievement for me is that we didn't implode like a lot of folks thought we did. We weren't co-opted. We didn't kill each other. At times we got close, but we didn't carry it out. And we came out still somewhat cohesive group. We're still doing actions. We're doing foreclosure defense actions. We're still doing the bank actions. I'm still occupying downtown. I'm occupying in front of that Los Angeles Community Action Network office in a tent. That's why my voice is gone. On Main Street, which I found that is the Beverly Hills of Skid Row. Because they get treated a lot different tent out on Main Street. So we're still together. We're still meeting with other occupiers. There's been a caucus forum where it's very interesting, and we're continuing on. People have learned a lot since being there. People have learned for this thing to keep going. We have to form coalitions with other groups that are already on the ground doing the work that we've been proposing to Occupy.
And I want to ask you about the foreclosures issue, because it definitely seems as though around the country, the various occupations are evolving into to attempt to meet the needs of those communities here in Los Angeles, which is, California's ground zero, it seems, for foreclosures around the nation. How important has it been for Occupy LA, Occupy the Hood, to feed into the work already being done on defending homes that are facing foreclosure? And do you feel that is getting the level of media coverage that Occupy LA did when you were camped out in front of City Hall?
Well, many of us were already doing this work before Occupy. So we've been doing it. So we've been able to have contact with people. We've been able to bring in the occupiers now. which is giving it a thrust. We got some pretty good coverage. I believe last week we had a foreclosure in Van Nuys and one on 60th and Vermont.
Yeah, we had a special report on Uprising about it, yeah.
So people from the Occupy who wanted to get more involved in community-based organizing, which is what Occupy the Hood is about, have joined us, and we're building upon that.
And David, in New York, I understand there's also a similar type of thing happening, isn't there?
Right. There's a lot of momentum going around anti-foreclosure actions. Occupy Our Homes had some successful actions. And, throughout the country, when we had that day of action, I forget when it was, about a month ago, I was getting text messages from people all around the country who were occupying foreclosed homes. So I think this is something that you're going to see a lot more of moving forward.
So ultimately, going back to what Naomi Klein was saying, do you feel that these sorts of more focused actions where the Occupy movement is taking very tangible steps on very tangible issues will ultimately be what defines the movement?
Yeah, I mean, this movement is all about leading by example and, focusing on the issues. The issue of co-option is something I deal with, almost daily, actually. The way the Tea Party ended up being folded into the Republican Party and totally co-opted. People worry that we're going to get folded into the Democratic Party and co-opted. So this is kind of an ongoing issue. But, the ultimate thing is, and we have to stay focused that, we say we're the 99%, so we have to be inclusive to as many people as possible. And some of those people are going to be Democrats and some will be Republicans. There was a lot of libertarian Ron Paul supporters who helped start this thing. So it's really all about uniting people across the political spectrum, all different viewpoints, and focusing on the issues, not so much, a politician or getting someone elected.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Ron Paul, because that's an issue that definitely there's some struggle around, particularly within the Occupy movement. He represents to certain people this stalwart anti-war figure, and to other people this stalwart anti-civil rights figure. He is a racist anti-right-winger who also happens to be very pro-life, so by extension anti-women's rights. How do his supporters within the movement not fracture the movement if this is supposed to be a movement that is inclusive by Ron Paul's very position on huge swaths of society? Can Ron Paul supporters be part of this movement? And I want everyone's opinions on this. In fact, let me start with you, Dalesy.
I think, something that became very popular to say at Occupy LA was to check your privilege. And I think that that's relevant to the whole issue with the Ron Paul supporters at Occupy LA, because, you did feel a very strong presence of, these libertarians and whatnot. But, by neglecting those issues, like you brought up, like about women's rights and obviously about gay rights, he has very strong conservative positions about that. And some people can go as far as to call him, racist, or at least the positions that he said, the things that have been published in his name have been racist. That's just, you're completely ignoring the social justice aspect of why we're out here resisting and why we're protesting, this unjust system.
So how did you deal with Ron Paul supporters in Occupy LA?
I would try to, and just with anyone that I disagreed with, you kind of have to realize that, we're all equal in this movement and we can't, tell anyone what to do, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I at least would try to remind these people that the economy started affecting these other communities long before 2008. It's nice that, that was able to galvanize us, the recession, and we're all here. But, why have these other communities been suffering from economic injustice for so long? And, at that point, it's nice to be a libertarian, but in practice, we have to actually make up for a lot of the injustices that have been, brought down in our communities. And Ron Paul doesn't, in my opinion, care about that, and at least the way that he presents his campaign doesn't seem to. He doesn't want to address those things, and so you have to check your privilege. If that's not something that's relevant, that's important to you, why isn't it?
Joe?
Yeah, I on occasion had come up against a lot of animosity in the movement with people who wanted to push certain agendas. I'm a gay woman, and I would come with my girlfriend to the protests and things. And you know, and in doing so, you know, people would talk a lot about Prop 8 and these kinds of issues about marriage. And it was difficult, you know, to have something so personal, right? So intimate as my own relationship become someone else's political issue, right? And so
what do you mean by that? Do you mean that there were Ron Paul supporters who were
I had never broached the issue of who are you going to vote for, because I don't particularly believe in that system. I believe in horizontal democracy, and it's incompatible with a representative democracy as I see it. But there were people that were very anti-human rights that would come through in an antagonizing kind of way. And, you know, but as someone who has things that are real life issues, they're not political to me. I should have the right to marry or not marry anyone that I so choose, right? But the issue wasn't that that I had a personal problem. It's that they had a political agenda. And so I, through patience and understanding and kindness and compassion, would listen and then offer a critique, right, of their position. And because in an occupation, really what you have is time to leverage, you can spend those hours dialoguing with someone, and then eventually they come to the position of, well, maybe that would be okay for you, you know, and you hope to hear that in that conversation where they then turn their position and say, well, I understand you. And then you hope that they take that to other conversations down the road and then can change political opinions based on that.
So you're turning it around. You're saying that the Occupy movement might have the effect of making Ron Paul supporters more compassionate?
Definitely. You know, there's not this, you know, the co-option thing, I used to get really revved up about it. But now I realize that if you can just get dissimilar ideas to confront one another, you will have dialectically a new idea from that conversation. And I will be changed and they will be changed. And we will then either press on together as the 99%, or one of us will leave the movement.
Right. Well, I want to get David and Bilal's thoughts on this as well.
Right. I think in the early days of Liberty Park, when it was like this buzzing, you know, central place, we had people from, you know, all different political viewpoints. You'd have a bunch of Ron Paul supporters talking to a bunch of feminists and a bunch of union workers, you know, and completely incompatible. And as Joan was saying, they would sit there at the park and have their arguments, and, you know, maybe couple days later, after arguing about it, they would come to consensus on something. And a lot of this movement is like, you know, you had all these people come into the movement who had their own little bubble of reality, their own ideology, you know, their own kind of groupthink that they were like indoctrinated into. So then in coming and mixing in this political discourse with everyone at the park and all through the country, they realized like, oh, wait a second, you know, maybe I was caught in a groupthink kind of box. You know, personally, I think when someone tells me they're a progressive or someone tells me they're a libertarian, I think, oh, man, these people are embedded, indoctrinated in groupthink. Because, you know, people in the real world, once you get down and dirty into it, you know, they have opinions on across the political spectrum on many different issues. So, you know, the dialogue, as Joan was speaking to, is you know, we watch it evolve. I mean, my own opinions have broadened and evolved so much since September 17th. Mm-hmm. And
Bilal?
Yeah, my method was this was the energy there was caused by all of these multi-tendencies that were occupied. It was something new for me. I'm a 60 child, but this quite was new because I'm used to dealing with many leftist tendencies, right? But this was across the board. So our method was through teach-ins and actions. And for instance, I was one of the representatives of the Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Network. So we brought hunger striker family supporters there to do a teach-in, do a visual. People started talking about the prison industrial complex and how it's linked to corporatism. Because I asked people, if you're against corporatism, you had to be against the political industrial complex. Well, some people bought those ideas where they've been indoctrinated, backgrounds, experiences, thought, well, we need prisons, don't we? So people came out of that teach-in thinking a little different about that and linking that with corporatism.
And what about the Occupy the Fed movement that is also very closely linked to the Ron Paul supporters? This is an action that is supposedly, well, it's an ongoing movement within the movement maybe, and one might even question, what exactly the issue is with the Federal Reserve. Different people, depending upon their political background, have different opinions on the Federal Reserve. And in researching this, it's not even easy to find out what exactly the Occupy the Fed actions that are supposed to be slated for Monday are really all about. And I'm wondering if any of you can discuss that. What is this Occupy the Fed thing?
Well, I just want to just be a little bit clearer. So the Ron Paul idea is end the Fed, and that existed prior to the movement, right? They've done a little bit of rebranding, a little bit of remessaging in order to be in line with the rhetoric of the movement. We at Occupy LA have endorsed a statement of the separation of wealth and state, and we as part of that, are looking to literature on state banks in order to break up the Fed, right? The image would be that the state would run a bank that would then house their own tax money and things. Because in Occupy LA, we went in consistently to City Hall. I mean, we were at City Hall, and we went into City Hall for public comment, and we got them to say that they're going to move forward with their I think it was called the Responsible Banking Ordinance, which then in the media they went out and said, oh, well, if we were going to hold the banks responsible, that would cost the state $58 million. And I say, well, how much are we losing not keeping them responsible? I mean, we were in there and council members were talking about Bank of America doing bid rigging. And this is in an open city council meeting, and then voting to keep them on the list of bankers that they would continue to do business with. And so as someone who had never been to a city council meeting before, watched this transpire, I realized that it was really a lot of our lack of participation, our lack of knowledge, that these bankers were depending on for their deregulation platforms to be pushed through Congress. And so, when it comes down to this idea of end the Fed or Occupy the Fed, we are Occupy LA doing an Occupy the Dream action at 3 p.m. at the Fed here.
So Occupy the Dream, which is affiliated with this movement that Ben Chavis has been involved in, a civil rights veteran, is related to Occupy the Fed.
Yeah, well, we're just going to do the action at the Fed.
Okay.
Right.
But Occupy the Fed seems to be an outgrowth of... David, please.
Occupy the Fed, is this like you're talking about the Alex Jones contingent of people?
There's a website, occupythefed.com, I believe.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about Occupy the Fed. I mean, when we started this whole thing, before September 17th, we were all about protesting the Fed. The reason why we picked Zuccotti Park is because it's right across the street from the New York Fed and also around.
And why is it important to protest the Federal Reserve?
Well, the Federal Reserve is, they're the central bank of, if you don't like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, the Federal Reserve is their central bank. The Federal Reserve is the central planning force behind a large sector of the global economy. And, if you look at like their quantitative easing programs, that's what essentially caused a spike in food prices throughout the world. And that's when you had Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria, all these countries have these food riots basically, which kind of sparked this whole movement. So you can kind of thank Ben Bernanke for helping spark this movement with his vicious policies. I mean, the Federal Reserve has, through deliberate policies, has impoverished tens of millions of people, and they are like the driving force behind this massive inequality of wealth we have.
I'm speaking with David DeGraw, Joan Donovan, Bilal Ali, and Dalesy. We're having a discussion about the Occupy movement, a 1-hour special here on Uprising. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll hear part 2 of this conversation. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm your host, Sonali Kolhotkar. Joining me in studio this morning are 4 members of various Occupy movements, 3 of them here local, Joan Donovan, as well as Bilal Ali and Dalesy, and David DeGros visiting Los Angeles. Welcome back to Uprising. Now, let's talk a little bit about the police crackdowns and the various raids and how the physical encampments that captured so much national media attention and public attention were raided so violently by police across the country in many, many cities, and what that did to the movement. On the one hand, it generated sympathy. On the other hand, I'm wondering if you thought that a lot of the public decided after watching Fox News that if the cops were raiding, then they must have been breaking laws, there must have been crime infestation. Having camps, physical camps versus not having camps, how has that changed the movement? David?
It's an interesting debate we've been having, but I think, the raid on the camps and breaking up the camps, I think has helped the movement in a lot of ways.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Because, it kind of spread everyone back out and everyone's kind of organizing in their own little sections.
People got
now
beat up and arrested and are facing court
that's
cases.
horrible, of course. That's absolutely horrible. But, all this police brutality has been very significant in growing the movement. After the first week we were occupying in New York, we had the march on September 24th, and it was on a Saturday, and I was kind of thinking like, wow, this might be our last big day. And that was the day that the 2 girls got netted in and pepper sprayed in the face. And then right after that, our numbers doubled, and then the next weekend we had the Brooklyn Bridge, and our numbers doubled again. And then Scott Olson happened, and, all these police brutality incidents really grew the movement.
They had the opposite effect.
Right. It helped us a lot. And then the evictions also gave us a lot of media attention. And, it was horrible to see that, people were calling, these camps home. And so that was horrible to see that. It was horrible to see people get arrested. But at the same time, it again gave us a lot of media attention. And now people are spread out all over the United States instead of just being in one central location. They're all through different communities, and they're organizing within their communities now. So every time the police do something like this, they actually really help us grow the movement.
Joe?
Well, I just want to make 2 points, which is, one is that when you combine something like a public uprising, right, where a populist movement, where you have people that are not necessarily incredibly political, coming together to defend equality, right, because we do feel that there is some kind of despotic force, that is running our government, that there is a shadow government in the background of these private corporations that are basically getting away with taking away the ability for people to just simply live their lives, right? Where they live, how they get around, what they eat has all been affected by this. When you combine this idea that the public exists and that their equality is threatened with a sense of public ownership, which is to go occupy a public space, right? Lots of occupations in the past have centered around workers' rights, and they happen in factories. And there are very clear rules about these factories where if you don't own it, someone has the right to tell you to leave. When you go to occupy a public space, you own that public space, right? You feel a sense of ownership over the public space. So when you combine those things and the state intervenes in any way, people come, right? We saw at Occupy LA, the night that we believed the raid was going to happen on the Sunday, we had close to 2,000 people show up to the General Assembly, right? Because those people felt a sense of ownership over the commons, over the park itself, and because those people believed their equality was threatened. And so when you do something like that, you get these momentous surges of the public appearing and then receding into their own neighborhoods. And you can imagine the dinner table conversation over Christmas. And in breaking up Occupy LA, in my opinion, the violence, the 1,400 police officers to arrest 300 people, overwhelming. Right, it should have happened in Hollywood, right? This is what you would imagine
staged.
From Spielberg. Well, Villagrosa was walking around without riot gear on, during the police, operation. That just shows me very clearly that this is, this is for it's to make us look criminal, right? And then one other thing I want to add is that after that eviction, we noticed that InterOccupy, which is our national network, that many more people are starting to pick up the phone and send emails and organize in their towns. And so the movement is actually starting to build these alliances around these foreclosure actions, sharing information, sharing tactics. And over time, you're just going to see better, bigger actions.
Dalesy, what about your thoughts? Were you there when the raid happened at Occupy Los Angeles?
I actually just got out of court this morning for my November 30th arrest at the Occupy LA raid. I was one of 70 occupiers that were located on the South Lawn, interlocking arms and resisting arrest. And it's really interesting because definitely the 300 of us that were all together arrested at Occupy LA came out of jail, arraigned or bailed out with a new sense of, screwing things up, or I can't say the word that I was trying to say there on the radio. But,
you were outraged.
Yeah, and I'm still outraged over it. And definitely like
so
what
the
Joan was
act of
saying,
being arrested, has that radicalized you further?
It definitely has, because I'm not gonna lie. For a second there, I thought, maybe we're not so threatening to City Hall, to the establishment. Here they are passing like friendly resolutions saying that they support what we're doing, but then they send out 1,400 cops in riot gear to move us all out. And I'm starting to look at it differently. What was our encampment? You woke up early in the morning. You got to go to the occupiers like meeting and assembly and discuss your camp issues, and that would end like at around 11 a.m. You might grab something to eat after that. The People's Collective University has ongoing classes about, it could be about credit, it could be about home foreclosures. And then, the Actions Committee meets at 4 o'clock. And you start talking about what are the next actions that we're going to take on. And then you might want to make it to facilitation in order to plan out the General Assembly. And, you have this day full of, radical actions, this beautiful political space where you can do that. And that's unheard of. Where else can I go to get all of that? And, maybe, I'm very young, and I think maybe I was naive and not seeing the power in that. But when those police came in and, and raided us, it was scary. I'm not going to lie, and my family has experienced, I have older Latino brothers. They've had negative interactions with the police. So, I wasn't one of the occupiers that was over there saying, we love the police. The police are part of the 99% too. I was like, I'm not going to try to convince them, They have their minds made up. That's why they have their badges on. And no offense to any police officers, but that's what it is. And Occupy LA, to speak specifically about our situation, it could seem that, the arrests are justified, that we were, maybe doing something to deserve it. Because frankly, when we were arrested, when the police moved in, there was no mainstream media present, okay? This is how it went down.
Blackout.
We were sitting down, interlocking arms, and the media was there. They were filming, you got Channel 4, ABC, they're asking questions, taking a lot of photographs. And then you see one of the sheriffs, kind of make, a nod, and because it just happened right before us, and all of those members of the media just walked out in a single file line, they knew exactly where they were going. They had to leave the area. And then the police started walking on us, and we were like, oh, wait, the cameras are gone. And that was a moment of fear. And, the people didn't get to see how the police treated us. It wasn't like Oakland. It wasn't it wasn't the tear gas. It wasn't the flash grenades. But, the police are trained to hurt you without leaving a single mark. Know that. Yeah. So, I'm saying, a lot of people came from, other privileged, experiences, backgrounds. They thought the police were there to help them. They were surprised when, they were having their joints twisted, pressure points applied to them in such a way that, you complied. You complied because you were being seriously hurt. Mm. But, I don't have, a bloody face for it. I don't have a broken arm for it. And that's what went down. And the people don't see that. But I'm putting it out there. I'm saying this on the radio because I want people to be aware of that. We were always a nonviolent, peaceful movement, and we were always just camping out there to exercise our right to peaceably assemble. The reaction that we got was completely, like Hollywood, like Joan was saying, and oppressive and change the minds of a lot of the people that were involved. I would hope that when people hear the story of what really went down during the raid, that the community would then also, change their opinion and maybe see, what we were doing.
Yeah, over and over again, they have showed that the First Amendment means very little in this country.
Bilal, your thoughts on this conversation?
Yeah, I want to make sure it's clear too. That night of the raid, it was not a raid on Occupy LA, assault on Occupy LA. It was a raid assault on the First Amendment, on the Constitution itself. So people should be clear about that. I was arrested a block away. I wasn't even there. I was doing my monthly poetry show at Fernando's Hideaway on 5th, and I was headed back down there when I heard the raid to get my stuff in my tent. And I was arrested up 1 block away. I don't know how I got a faded dispersal. I never got a dispersal order, and the dispersal order was in the City Hall lawn. But anyway, so yes, it has galvanized a lot of people. A movement such as this, historically, take it back to the civil rights movement, watching people being assaulted on TV, Bull Connor and that. A lot of people who may not agree with the agenda of the civil rights people still respected those people being courageous to go out there. And because of that, gaining that respect, they did get, they gained the support. And yes, a lot of people are now calling us about this, how do you get involved in it? And to give you another example, the homeless folks that were part of the process Occupy, because the police, the LAPD Central Division, raised those folks every night. So this thing happened that one night with Occupy is no big deal to me because I organize downtown. That happens every night to the homeless people, right? And because of those raids every night, that, thanks to the cops, that got them involved in the process Occupy LA. They came there and they were more secure. They didn't have to take their tents down. They weren't getting harassed. They weren't getting beaten. And so thanks to the police, they pushed them toward the Occupy movement. And they joined the Occupy movement.
Well, let's look to the future of this movement. Coming up in Chicago, the G8 summit and NATO summits are going to be held later this year. Occupy Chicago is already preparing for these events, and Mayor Rahm Emanuel has proposed to dramatically increase the fines of protesters who resist arrest, even passively, from $25 to $200. He wants to double the maximum fine to $1,000. And he wants to make these permanent. At the same time as we're seeing movements rising up, not just here but around the world, we see simultaneously the police state clamping down almost necessarily. And perhaps in the long view of it, we shouldn't be surprised that this is happening. And just before New Year's, President Obama signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act that would allow people to be permanently detained on suspicion of terrorism. And we've known not just over the past few years, but in history, that those who are fighting for justice and against resistance are equated as, or can be equated by the state, by the powers that be, as terrorists or fomenting terrorist activity. Going forward, this movement is facing not only an amazing revelation, public consciousness that is joining them, but also a dangerous era of state repression. There are, cases of people who are protesting at the Republican National Convention who are facing severe repercussions. The FBI is getting involved. How do the four of you foresee the future of the Occupy movement within this more dangerous world? Because the harder the 99% fight to have their rights, the harder the 1% are going to cling to their power.
Well, I think that's exactly what you just said there. It's the 1% desperately trying to cling to power. And, NDAA and all these different crackdowns, they're very scary. I mean, just to be honest, it is scary. And, we talk about this, like, what if they start targeting us?
They will, though, right?
Right. And there's been some information that there's a unit within the NYPD that's working with Bloomberg that has a list of names, and they're just targeting people for arrest already. I don't know how true that is, but it's been discussed many times. So all these different crackdowns, it's just the 1%, they're scared of us. they see, I mean, the tide is shifting against them, and they're desperately trying to cling to power. But I think in the long run, it's probably going to take a lot of personal sacrifice from key people throughout this movement. But in the long run, when they clamp down like this, they show that it's a police state. They show everyone that they're just, power hungry, addicted to power, and willing to do anything to maintain power. So in the long run, they're really hurting themselves by resorting to these tactics. Unfortunately, you're going to have a lot of, martyr type people. Certainly don't want to see anything like that happen, but this is the way it goes.
Joan?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's remarkable about the movement is just the commitment to nonviolence, right? Where people stand up and say, "Here I stand. I can do no other." Right? And you just you keep your hands either at your sides, you keep your palms open, and you wait for it, and you wait for them to show their hand. But in that nonviolence comes an incredible capacity to be creative. We know what they're coming with, right? They've got their flash grenades, they got their pepper spray, they've got their pressure points. They have no idea the capacity we have to organize because we're not an organization, right? They have no idea what we can come with because what they do know is we're not going to come with fists, right? But we might not come in the form of people. We might not show up, at all. And in doing so, we make a whole bunch of other statements, right? And because we can leverage the internet and the capacity to broadcast, even when they want a media blackout, we have the footage. We have the capacity to broadcast. We have the Twitter channels.
And that's something very new for movements today compared to many decades ago or even a decade ago.
We all learn by doing. We all learn.
So everybody's a journalist.
Everyone is the capacity for citizen journalism is enormous right now. I know watching multiple raids through multiple live feeds at different angles, I was able to we were able as part of the raid committee at Occupy Los Angeles to know exactly how it was that they were going to come in and wedge and pull us out, and people were prepared for that. People were ready for that because we were able to see, even from people just passively participating in the Occupy Boston raids from a window in an apartment building up above the raid, you were able to watch from the air exactly how it went down and be prepared for that kind of thing. So when it comes to these actions that are going to take place in Chicago, in terms of the Occupy movement, it'll be up to different movements to be creative to speak in multiple ways.
And I should mention there's also going to be a general strike that's planned for May 1st.
Yeah.
Dalesy, your thoughts, and this is really our wrap-up of this show. How do you foresee, having experienced firsthand going through this arrest, how do you foresee this movement being able to go forward as we will be expecting more repression?
In terms of the state repression, I think that sometimes you can participate in civil disobedience because strategically you might be getting something out of it. Like, if we're able to shut down banks, linking arms around it or whatnot, you know what I mean? That is something we're stopping the order of business for the day for a bank, And sometimes it's principled. Sometimes, like some occupiers did on the 17th of December, they reoccupied the space, They jumped the fence and they went back inside, even though it was a few of them because that was morally the right thing to do, to, not stand by and silence his consent and just allow our public space to be boarded off like that, and that's wrong, that's our space, and those no trespassing signs, that's not manner, time, and place. That's BS in my opinion. And so if for any of these actions, civil disobedience actions, if we're going to be facing state repression, it seems to me that we have to have the backing of the community. Like the symbolism of what we're doing, the principles we're standing up for, like it's lost if the community doesn't get it. And that's why I'm so committed to being involved with Occupy the Hood, because we are spreading the message of the Occupy movement, to the local communities where people may not necessarily get it, or people come from Latino backgrounds where they already know it's a police state, and that's why they aren't showing up. You know what I'm saying? So just so that symbolism isn't lost, we have to reach out to them, and we will be reaching out to them so that they will resist and have the courage to hopefully shut down the city May 1st. So do expect us. We will be having, moving, roaming GAs, mic checks throughout the city. We'll be having hopefully some more creative events, and we invite everyone who's listening to this to participate and to be a part of it, because this is a horizontal movement. Everyone is equal, and we're all leaders, and we only want to hear what other people have to say and get this moving. And if you feel like you're fed up, you've had enough, so much so that you don't even care if you're going to face police repression because your quality of your life has already been affected by, the economic injustice that you're in, please come out and, don't be quiet. Stand up for yourself.
Final thoughts, Bilal Ali.
Well, we say this at Occupy the Hood. We don't deoccupy, we multiply. So we're going to continue to build. Yes, there will be some repression come down. I came out of the 60s around that whole Black Panther movement thing. And, there will be repression and there will be some martyrs. But as that happens, they only expose themselves, right? And expose who their real handlers are. And we start around man. No one's jamming up the politicians like they should be jammed up. And we got this Democratic administration, mostly Democratic mayors, where the occupations went down, where people were brutally attacked. Antonio Villaraigosa is the chair of the U.S. Council of Mayors, and they got together with Homeland Security and the FBI and plotted on raiding these. So we're going to be visiting Villaraigosa. Martin Luther King Day, September 16th. We will be occupying
January 16th.
January 16th. We will be occupying the mayor's mansion. Call him out on his role in the raid, the lies he told subsequent to what really happened. And we'll be there occupying him with the tents and all of that. And then we will proceed from there to the Martin Luther Kingdom Day Parade, where we'll be joining the Martin Luther King Coalition for Jobs, Peace, and Justice, and other groups, and we'll be taking the Occupy message we'll be occupying the MLK Day Parade.
3 p.m. Federal Reserve in L.A.
That's right. Okay,
on
we'll
Martin
post,
Luther King Day.
We'll post all of the detailed event information on uprisingradio.org later today. I want to thank all of you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.